Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. I never thought it would come to this. Standing there, watching Sarah pack her things while tears rolled down her cheeks. She begged, pleaded for another chance. But I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a life I thought was solid, all burned to the ground the moment I saw that text message on her phone. It started innocently enough, I guess. Sarah had always been a little distant, especially in the last year. I thought it was just life catching up with us, the kids were getting older, her freelance gigs were picking up, and work was always demanding. We were both in our 30s, and I figured maybe this was just the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. But that gut feeling you get when something's wrong? Yeah, that started gnawing at me. The first sign was her phone. It was always glued to her now, like an extra limb. When we'd go to bed, she'd turn it face down on the nightstand, something she never used to do. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was work emails or just her needing space. But then she started taking these work meetings late at night, said they were for her new clients. I didn't want to be that husband who questioned everything, who seemed controlling or paranoid, so I let it go. Big mistake. It was one of those meetings that set everything in motion. I'd stayed up late, finishing a project for work. She had gone out again, said it was just a quick meeting at a local coffee shop with one of her clients. Nothing strange about that, right? Except she was gone for hours. By the time she got home, it was nearly midnight. She slipped in quietly, like a shadow, and went straight to bed. I don't even think she noticed I was still awake. But here's the thing, I had started watching. Little things at first. The way she rushed out the door with her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The way she barely looked me in the eye anymore. It was subtle, but once you start paying attention, the cracks start to show. The night it all blew up, Sarah had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. I don't know what pushed me to check it, maybe some part of me already knew what I'd find. Her phone lit up with a message, and the name on the screen wasn't one I recognized, Matt. The message was short, but it was enough to blow my world apart. Can't wait to feel you again tonight. I remember staring at those words, feeling like someone had just punched me in the stomach. For a minute, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to throw her phone across the room, smash it into pieces, anything to make it go away. But I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at the screen until the light faded and the room was dark again. When Sarah came out of the shower, towel wrapped around her, hair dripping onto the floor, she glanced at me but didn't seem to notice the change in the air. I didn't confront her then. No, I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Instead, I took that moment and buried it, deep down, where she couldn't reach it. I had to be smart about this. The next few days, I watched her even closer. She was careful, I'll give her that. But no one's perfect. She started taking more of these meetings, always at odd hours, always rushing out the door. I played it cool, kept things normal, but inside I was burning. I needed proof, solid proof, before I could confront her. One stupid text wasn't going to be enough. That's when I started digging. I'd wait until she was asleep, then I'd check her phone. She had started deleting the texts from Matt, but there were other signs, calls to unknown numbers, late-night emails that didn't add up. And then there was her bank account. We shared most of our finances, but Sarah had a personal account she used for her freelance work. I hadn't paid much attention to it before, but now I did. There were charges I couldn't explain, restaurants she'd never mentioned, hotel stays in the city when she was supposed to be working. It didn't take long for me to piece it together. She wasn't meeting clients at all. She was meeting Matt. I knew it was time to confront her, but I didn't want to do it without being prepared. So, I made sure I had everything in place first. I met with a lawyer, filed the divorce papers, and made arrangements for the kids. The last thing I wanted was for them to be caught in the crossfire of whatever was coming next. The day I decided to confront her was just like any other. Sarah came home late, as usual, and I was waiting for her in the living room. I had packed her bags earlier that afternoon, leaving them by the front door. When she saw them, her face went pale. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. I held up her phone. "You left this unlocked," I said, my voice calm. "Care to explain why Matt can't wait to feel you again?" The blood drained from her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For a moment, I thought she might faint. But then, just like that, the mask slipped, and she started crying. Not tears of guilt or shame, no, these were the tears of someone who had been caught and knew there was no way out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Spare me the excuses," I snapped. "I know everything. The late nights, the lies, the hotel rooms. Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" She collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It's not what you think," she sobbed. "I still love you, I do. It was just a mistake." I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter in the quiet room. "A mistake? Sarah, this wasn't a mistake. It was months of lies. You destroyed everything." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "Please," she begged, "don't do this. Don't end it like this. Think of the kids. We can fix this, I promise." But I had made up my mind. There was no going back from this. I stood up, walking toward the door where her bags waited. "Get out," I said quietly. "I've already filed the papers. It's over." Sarah stood, her body trembling as she reached for her bags. "You don't mean this," she whispered. "We can work through this. Please, just let me stay." But I was done. I had taken back control, and there was no way in hell I was giving it up again. Sarah was gone by the next morning. I watched as she pulled her suitcase down the driveway, her shoulders slumped, head down. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious or relieved. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out all the parts of me that made me human and left an empty shell in its place. I kept telling myself this was what I wanted, that this was justice, that I'd won. But there's no real winning when a marriage dies. It's just survival. The kids were still asleep upstairs. They didn't know yet, and that was another storm on the horizon. How do you explain to your children that their mother broke the family apart? That you weren't enough to keep her faithful? I dreaded it, but I wasn't going to let her take that conversation from me. When I tell them, I'd do it on my terms. But for now, I needed to deal with the aftermath. After Sarah left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the cup of coffee in front of me. I wasn't even sure how long I sat there, minutes, hours. The house was too quiet, too still, and the absence of her presence, despite everything, gnawed at me. At some point, my phone buzzed. It was from the lawyer, confirming that the divorce proceedings had officially started. Sarah had no idea what was coming. I hadn't told her about the money yet, hadn't revealed that I'd drained our joint accounts into one with only my name on it. She would find out soon enough when she tried to pay for whatever escape plan she had in mind. In a way, I was glad she didn't argue when I told her to leave. Maybe she thought I'd cool off, that we'd talk it out and work through it like one of those couples on TV who hit rock bottom but somehow rebuild. But that wasn't happening. Not this time. This betrayal wasn't something I could forgive, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me back down. The kids woke up eventually, groggy and unaware of the chaos that had just ripped through our home. Emma, our 13-year-old, stumbled into the kitchen first, her hair still a tangled mess from sleep. Daniel, 11, trailed behind her, already scrolling through his phone like he hadn't just rolled out of bed. "Morning, Dad," Emma mumbled, reaching for the cereal cabinet. I knew this was the moment. I had to tell them now, before they figured it out on their own. I cleared my throat, trying to find the right words, but nothing felt good enough. "Hey," I started, my voice already cracking. "We need to talk." Emma stopped, mid-pour, and looked at me. "What's up?" she asked, a frown forming on her face. Daniel barely looked up from his phone. He was still half asleep, lost in whatever game had his attention. But I knew that as soon as I said it, both their worlds would change. "Your mom's gone." The words hung in the air for a moment before they seemed to register. Emma put the cereal box down slowly, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean, gone?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Your mom and we're getting a divorce." Daniel's head shot up at the word divorce. Emma blinked, her confusion quickly shifting into disbelief. "What? Why? What happened?" I paused, running my hand over my face. How could I tell them the truth without destroying their image of her? But the truth was all I had left. "Your mom hasn't been honest with me. Or with us. She's been seeing someone else." Daniel dropped his phone onto the table, his wide eyes searching mine for some sign that this was a bad joke. Emma's face hardened, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was the spitting image of Sarah when she got angry, the same cold, calculating look that I'd seen too many times over the last year. "So, she cheated?" Emma asked, her voice flat and emotionless. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The look on her face was worse than I could have imagined. She wasn't just angry, she was devastated. "How long?" Emma's voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know exactly," I lied. I knew exactly how long it had been, but telling them that it had gone on for months would only twist the knife further. Daniel was staring at the floor, not saying a word. His face was pale, his body stiff like he didn't know how to process what I had just told him. I wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but I knew that this was something no amount of hugs could fix. "Why didn't you stop her?" Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper, and his words felt like a punch to the gut. "How do you explain to your son that there are some things you can't stop, no matter how hard you try?" "I didn't know," I said quietly. "Not until recently. And by then, it was already too late." Emma slammed her hand onto the table, making the dishes rattle. "So what now? What happens to us?" "You're staying here with me," I said quickly, hoping to offer some sense of stability. "Your mom, she's going to need some time to figure things out, but you'll still see her." Emma scoffed. "I don't want to see her." Come on." "No," she snapped. "She ruined everything. She cheated on you, on us. Why should I want to see her after this?" Daniel still hadn't said anything, but I could see the tears welling up in his eyes. Emma was tough, like Sarah, but Daniel, he had always been sensitive, always the one to wear his heart on his sleeve. "Look," I said, trying to calm things down. "I know this is hard, and I know it's confusing. But your mom is still your mom. She loves you both, and no matter what happens between us, that doesn't change." Emma crossed her arms, her jaw set in defiance. "Yeah, well, I don't love her anymore." I didn't know how to respond to that. What could I say? I couldn't force them to forgive her, and part of me didn't even want them to. But I knew that this was only the beginning. There would be anger, tears, confusion, all the things I hadn't even had the chance to process yet. And somehow, I had to hold it all together, for them. The rest of the day was a blur. Emma stormed off to her room after our conversation, slamming the door so hard I was surprised it didn't fall off its hinges. Daniel retreated to the couch, curling up into a ball and burying his face in a pillow. I left them alone, figuring they needed space, just like I did. I spent the afternoon in my office, trying to distract myself with work, but my mind kept drifting back to Sarah. I kept replaying the last few weeks in my head, wondering if there was something I could have done differently, some way I could have saved us before it all spiraled out of control. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that there was nothing to save. Our marriage had been dying long before I found that text message. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I found myself staring at my phone, debating whether or not to text Sarah. I hadn't spoken to her since she left, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to. But part of me needed to know where she was, what she was doing. Was she with him? Was she regretting what she'd done, or was she already moving on with her new life? I opened her contact, my finger hovering over the call button. But then I stopped. What good would it do? We were done. I had made sure of that. I tossed the phone onto the couch and grabbed a beer from the fridge instead. The silence in the house was suffocating, and I found myself missing the noise, the chaos that came with having a full house. Now it was just me, sitting in a dark living room, trying to figure out what the hell my life was supposed to look like now. I had won. I had taken back control. But for some reason, it didn't feel like a victory. The days that followed felt like a slow, unraveling nightmare. Sarah was gone, but her absence lingered in the house like a phantom. The kids were barely speaking to me, Emma especially. Her resentment simmered just beneath the surface, and I didn't know how to reach her. Daniel, on the other hand, was quieter than ever, retreating into himself in a way that made me feel like I was losing him too. I tried to keep things normal for them. Tried to keep the routine going, school runs, dinner on the table, weekend activities. But the reality was that nothing was normal anymore. The hole Sarah left behind was enormous, and no matter how much I wanted to believe that we could just move on, the truth was that we were all shattered. One afternoon, about a week after Sarah left, Emma came home from school and slammed her backpack down on the kitchen table, her face twisted with anger. I could tell right away that something had happened. "What's wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. She glared at me, her blue eyes, so much like her mother's, narrowing. "Everyone knows," she spat. "Everyone at school knows about Mom. They're all talking about it." My heart sank. I hadn't thought about how quickly word would spread, how fast the rumors would circulate once people realized that Sarah wasn't coming back. In a small town like ours, gossip moved faster than the wind. "Emma, I'm sorry. I didn't think." "You didn't think," she cut me off, her voice rising. "You didn't think about how this would affect us. About how embarrassing this is." I stood up from the table, trying to keep my calm. "Emma, this isn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did you," she shot back, her voice cracking. "But now everyone thinks our family is a joke." I had no idea how to respond to that. She was right, this was public now, and no matter how much I wanted to protect her from the fallout, there was nothing I could do to stop it. The kids at her school were ruthless, and I knew that Sarah's affair would become fuel for their cruelty. "I'll talk to your school," I said, though I wasn't even sure what that meant. What could I say? I couldn't control what people said about us. "Don't bother," she muttered, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "You can't fix this." She stormed off, leaving me standing there, helpless. The door to her bedroom slammed shut, and I heard her lock it. That was becoming her new habit, locking herself away, shutting me out. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit something, to release all the rage and frustration that had been building inside me. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the closed door, wondering how the hell I was supposed to hold this family together. Daniel was in the living room, quietly playing a video game. He hadn't said much since that morning when I told him and Emma about Sarah. I walked over to the couch and sat down next to him, hoping to break through the wall he had built around himself. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "How are you doing?" He shrugged, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Fine." I knew he wasn't fine. I could see the sadness in his face, the way he withdrew from everything around him. But he wasn't like Emma, he didn't explode or lash out. He just shut down. "You know," I began, "if you want to talk about anything, I'm here." He paused the game, setting the controller down. For a moment, I thought he might actually open up, that he might say something. But instead, he looked at me with those big, sad eyes and asked, "Is Mom coming back?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so focused on my own anger, my own sense of betrayal, that I hadn't really considered what the kids were going through. Daniel wasn't angry like Emma, he was just heartbroken. He didn't understand why everything had fallen apart. "No, buddy," I said quietly. "Mom's not coming back. Not to live here." He nodded, like he had expected that answer, but the disappointment in his eyes was palpable. "Why did she leave?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Your mom made some mistakes," I said carefully. "She wasn't honest with me, and that hurt our family. But she still loves you and Emma. None of this is your fault." Daniel didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, staring at his hands. Finally, he asked, "Does she love you?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. Did she love me? Maybe once, a long time ago, but whatever love had existed between us was gone now, buried beneath lies and betrayal. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe not anymore." He didn't ask any more questions after that. He just picked up the controller and resumed his game, retreating back into his world of pixels and sound effects. I sat next to him, feeling utterly powerless. That night, after the kids were asleep, I poured myself a drink and sat on the back porch, staring out into the yard. The silence was deafening. This was supposed to be the part of my life where everything settled down, where we built on the foundation we had laid, watching the kids grow up, getting old together. Instead, I was sitting alone, wondering how it had all fallen apart so fast. A soft chime from my phone broke the silence. It was a text from Sarah. My chest tightened as I unlocked the phone to read it. "We need to talk." That was it. No apology, no explanation, just a simple message. I stared at it for a long time, not sure if I wanted to respond. Part of me didn't even want to hear from her again. The other part, the part that was still processing the wreckage, knew that this conversation was inevitable. There were still things we needed to sort out, like the kids and the divorce. But was I ready to talk to her? After everything she'd done? I typed a quick reply before I could second-guess myself, "Fine. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. I'll be here." I hit send and took a long sip of whiskey, feeling the burn as it slid down my throat. The conversation tomorrow would be ugly, but it had to happen. If I was going to move forward, I needed to face her one more time, get everything out in the open, and close this chapter of my life. The next morning, I woke up early, nerves already gnawing at my stomach. I didn't know what I was expecting from this meeting, an apology, maybe. Closure. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I needed answers. I needed to hear her say why she did this, why she chose to blow up our family for a guy like Matt. I needed to understand. At exactly 10 a.m., Sarah's car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as she stepped out, her face unreadable. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept much either. Good. Maybe she was feeling some of the weight of her decisions after all. She knocked on the door, and I let her in without a word. The kids were at school, and the house felt emptier than ever. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where I had first confronted her with the truth. The same place where our marriage had unraveled. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the tension hanging between us, thick and suffocating. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her eyes cast down at the table. I waited for more, but that was it. Just those two words. Sorry. That was all she had. "You're sorry." I repeated, my voice cold. You cheated on me, lied to me, blew up our family, and all you have to say is that you're sorry. She flinched at the venom in my voice but didn't look up. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered. It got out of control. Out of control. I scoffed. It didn't just happen, Sarah. You made a choice. You chose him over us. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Not anymore. Not after everything. I know, she said, her voice trembling. I know I screwed up. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt the kids. You didn't mean to hurt us. I repeated, incredulous. Then what the hell did you think was going to happen, Sarah? Did you think you could just keep sneaking around, lying to me, and everything would be fine? She wiped her eyes, finally looking up at me. I don't know, she whispered. I wasn't thinking. I was unhappy. Unhappy. That word hit me like a hammer. We had built a life together, raised 2 kids, and she was unhappy. What the hell did she want that I hadn't given her? I leaned forward, my anger boiling over. You know what? I was unhappy too, Sarah. But I didn't go and destroy our family over it. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, staring at me with those tear-filled eyes, and for the first time, I realized that I didn't recognize her anymore. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the woman I had married. She was someone else. The kitchen was quiet after Sarah left. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the empty chair she had occupied, wondering what had happened to the life we had once shared. I thought our meeting would give me some kind of closure, that hearing her excuses would make everything make sense. But instead, it only deepened the pit inside me. She was unhappy. What kind of explanation was that? I thought about the kids, about how I was going to keep them afloat through this storm, and about what my life would look like after all of this was over. What would I be? Just a single dad, trying to pick up the pieces while she went off with some other guy, pretending like she hadn't destroyed us. I stood up and poured myself another cup of coffee, but it tasted bitter. Nothing felt right anymore. I glanced out the window, watching Sarah's car disappear down the street, and that's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I know the truth. Meet me at Birchwood Cafe, 2 p.m. I frowned, staring at the message. What truth? I thought I knew all there was to know. Sarah had been cheating with Matt, and now our marriage was dead. What more was there? But something about the message pulled at me, a curiosity I couldn't shake. After everything that had happened, I figured I had nothing left to lose. So I grabbed my coat, threw on my shoes, and left the house. Birchwood Cafe was only a 10-minute drive away, a small, cozy place we used to go to before everything fell apart. The idea of meeting a stranger there was unsettling, but I couldn't stop thinking about the message. When I arrived, the cafe was quiet, only a few people scattered at the tables. I scanned the room, looking for someone who might be waiting for me, but no one seemed out of place. Then, in the corner, I spotted her. My heart stopped. It was his wife, Matt's wife, Jessica. She had the same exhausted look that I had seen on my own face in the mirror these past few weeks. Her eyes met mine, and she gestured for me to sit down. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't even known she existed. Sarah had never mentioned that Matt was married. I felt a mix of anger and confusion as I made my way to her table and sat across from her. Jessica, right? I asked cautiously. She nodded, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, though she didn't seem to be drinking. I'm sorry for dragging you into this, she said quietly. But you deserve to know the full story. I felt my stomach twist. What more is there to know? My wife cheated on me with your husband. That's pretty much all I need. Jessica shook her head, her eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Pain, yes, but there was more. Matt's not who you think he is, she said softly. And neither is Sarah. What are you talking about? She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of papers, placing them on the table between us. I glanced down and saw that they were private investigator reports. Photos. Emails. Bank statements. My heart began to race as I looked through them. It wasn't just Sarah's affair. It was bigger. Matt had been running some kind of scam, a financial scheme that Sarah had gotten wrapped up in. The affair was only a part of it, a smokescreen to hide what they were really doing. He had convinced Sarah to siphon money from our joint accounts into secret offshore accounts, slowly bleeding me dry while I was none the wiser. My mind was spinning. This wasn't just an affair, it was fraud. Theft. My hands shook as I flipped through the documents, seeing the proof laid out in black and white. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me with another man, she had been systematically robbing me for months. Jessica's voice was calm, though I could tell she was barely holding it together. I found out about a month ago, she said. Matt's been doing this for years, targeting married women, convincing them to get involved in his schemes. He's a predator. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So Sarah, she knew about this? She was part of it? Jessica nodded. She was in deep. Matt probably promised her a new life, something more exciting than what you could give her. But it's all lies. He takes what he wants, and when things fall apart, he leaves. That's what he's done with every woman before her. I felt sick. Everything I thought I knew had been a lie. Sarah hadn't just been looking for excitement, she had been helping Matt steal from me, from our family. And all this time, I had been worried about the emotional betrayal, never realizing that the real damage was happening right under my nose. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jessica looked down at her coffee. Because Matt's disappeared. He cleaned out our accounts, took everything, and vanished. I thought you should know before it happens to you too. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. I had already moved the money from our joint accounts into my own, but if Sarah was in on this, who knew what else they had planned? My mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out above the rest. Sarah wasn't just guilty of cheating, she was a criminal. And if I didn't act fast, I could lose everything. I stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I need to go, I said, my voice shaking. Jessica nodded. Be careful. Matt's dangerous. I left the cafe in a daze, my heart pounding as I raced back to my car. The drive home was a blur. I needed to think. I needed to figure out what to do. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something strange. Sarah's car was parked outside the house. I hadn't expected to see her again so soon, especially after our heated conversation that morning. I stepped out of the car and approached the front door, my mind racing with all the new information Jessica had just dropped on me. I opened the door and found Sarah standing in the hallway, her face pale. She looked different now, like someone I didn't know, someone who had been hiding behind a mask for far too long. We need to talk, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond, my anger boiling beneath the surface. She must have seen it in my eyes because she stepped back, her hand trembling slightly as she raised it in a gesture of surrender. I know what you're going to say, she began. And I can explain. Explain. I spat, my voice trembling with fury. You've been stealing from me, Sarah. You and Matt, robbing me blind while I thought it was just some affair. This wasn't just about you wanting a different life. You were helping him destroy mine. Her face crumpled, tears spilling from her eyes. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she sobbed. I was desperate. He promised me. Promised you what? That you could have everything you wanted if you just betrayed me, lied to me, stole from me. She shook her head, her sobs intensifying. I didn't know how to get out. I thought. I don't care what you thought. I shouted, my voice shaking the walls. You've ruined everything. Suddenly, there was a noise behind me, and I turned to see Daniel and Emma standing at the top of the stairs, their faces pale, eyes wide. They had heard everything. The reality of the situation hit me like a freight train. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about Sarah. Our kids were caught in the middle of a nightmare that neither of us could ever undo. Sarah stood frozen, her tears still falling, but I didn't care anymore. I couldn't feel anything but rage. Get out, I said, my voice cold and final. And this time, don't ever come back. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. She simply grabbed her things, gave one last glance toward the kids, and walked out of our lives for good. As I watched her go, I realized something: this was the closure I had been looking for. Not the kind that came with understanding or forgiveness, but the kind that came with the finality of knowing that it was truly over. There was no going back. No fixing what had been broken. But at least now I had the truth. And sometimes, that's all you need to move forward.